with the first question.
जिनकी बहू बेटियों की इज्जत
You are
बचाने के
today
लिए वो इस
the
धरती पर आए
most valuable company in the
और
world.
जो लोग
And
2014 के
you
31
always have
दिसंबर
been
से
a
पहले यहाँ
promoter
पहुंच
of
गए
this
हैं
notion to
उनको
create
मोदी जी ने
long-term
भारत की
shared value.
नागरिकता
And
देना तय
we
किया है
discuss here the adoption of a comprehensive,
उनको
unified
भारत की मुख्य
ESG
धारा में
measurement
शामिल
system.
करना तय
But you
किया
have
है
been a pioneer. You have
आप बताइए
submitted your company to all
पिछले 20
kinds
साल
of
से एक डॉक्टर
criteria.
यहाँ पढ़ करके
Now,
आया और वो यहाँ
what is your
प्रैक्टिस नहीं कर
recipe?
सकता क्योंकि उसको डिग्री
I put
पाकिस्तान
it in a very short question. What is your
आप
recipe
बताइए
to do good
अगर वो यहाँ रह रहा है
and to do well
तो
at
उसको
the same
नागरिकता
time?
मिले और वो यहाँ प्रैक्टिस
First of all,
करे
it's
इसकी
great
व्यवस्था
to
होनी
be
चाहिए
back
कि नहीं होनी
and
चाहिए
to do this
होनी चाहिए
chat
कि
with
नहीं
you,
होनी चाहिए
Klaus, and it's
यही
fantastic to,
व्यवस्था इस
in
कानून से
particular, this year's forum, I think, has even
मैं
a
आपको
particularly
निवेदन करूंगा
different tenor even.
कभी आपको मौका
And
मिले
it's thanks to sort of
तो
a lot of
दिल्ली में
what
आपने
you've
जाना
set
उन
in
सरदारों के
motion. So
कैंप
what,
में
when I
जो
look at
अफगानिस्तान से आए
what's
हैं
the social purpose of a
अफगानिस्तान
firm or
में
a corporation?
50,000 लोग रहते थे
If
50,000
last
परिवार
year,
सिख
perhaps there were
सिख
more
भाई
books written
आज
on
पाकिस्तान
capitalism and
में
how capitalism needs to be
5,000 लोग रह
redefined
गए
than ever
सिर्फ
before. And one such
कहाँ चले
book,
गए 50,000
written
परिवार
by an Oxford economist called Colin
आप
Mayer,
जा करके
there's
देखिए
a very good
इंदौर में
definition of the
सिंध
social
कॉलोनी में
purpose of a
सिंध
firm,
से आए हुए
where
लोग
he says a
किस तरीके
corporation
से अपनी
finds
बहू बेटी की इज्जत
profitable
बचाते हुए वो यहाँ पर
solutions to
शरण के लिए
the
आए
challenges of people,
आपको मौका
planet.
मिले
Right, the
तो
key word
बंगाल में
is
जाइए कभी आप पछुआ
profitable,
समाज देखिए
because we
जो
do
दलित
know
है
that
पीड़ित है
capitalism does have the ability to
उनके
allocate
बच्चों को पढ़ने की
resources
व्यवस्था
in the
नहीं है
most efficient way.
स्कूल में
But the
एडमिशन नहीं ले
other
सकते
key
क्योंकि वो
word
भारत के
is the
नागरिक हैं
challenges of people in the planet. It's not about
कोई
creating more
पढ़ाई आगे
challenges for
कर नहीं
people
सकते
in the
क्योंकि वो
planet,
भारत के
but to
नागरिक हैं
have real solutions to the problems. I
स्वास्थ्य
like
सेवा नहीं
that.
ले
In
सकते
fact, as a
क्योंकि वो भारत के
platform
नागरिक
company
नहीं
at Microsoft, it's not about even doing
आयुष्मान भारत
ESG
में
for
सब कुछ नहीं
ESG
हो
sake.
सकते
The core
गरीब है
business model of
लेकिन
the
भारत
company
आयुष्मान
is
भारत
this
आप
business
देखिए
model. If we succeed, will there be economic growth that's broad spread? Will the economic growth be inclusive? Will we build more trust in technology? And of course now, can we even ensure that through our engagement in the world, there is a more sustainable planet? So I think it comes down to having that core business design incorporate when you do well, the world around you does well. And if you get that right, then a lot of things fall in place. But if you're trying to just use these as band-aids and your core business model, your core operations not aligned with the world, then you have a real challenge.
Satya, could you formulate it in the following ways that you say, not to find any more solutions for your clients, but to find solutions for society? That should be the purpose of a company. And of course, by finding solutions for society, you find your clients and yourself.
That's correct. That's correct. And people, I mean, we all exist. I mean, I think that's kind of perhaps the most obvious thing sometimes we forget. People and institutions are all part of our society. And they all are on our planet. And so if you don't sort of think about the broader context, the very system that we have come to depend on is not stable.
Satya, when I was preparing, following, let's say, attempts since many years on the US Business Roundtable Declaration, and I defend this notion of stakeholdership, inclusive capitalism. The criticism I always get relates to the CEO remuneration. Can you say, I know it's a very sensitive question, but can you say some word about it? How you feel?
You know, I think it's definitely a good topic to discuss. I mean, at the end of the day, if I look at the inequities in the world, remuneration of anybody, whether it's a CEO or whether it's a return on capital, all of those are, I think, worthwhile things to be debated. Now, the question ultimately goes back to is, what is the market saying and what is the society saying? There's a fantastic book I recently read where it's called The Narrow Corridor. It's written by, I think, two economists, where they sort of say it's the real constant tension between what does the society want, and then in that case it talks about what does the government want, and these are the two centers of power. And you have to find that narrow corridor. And similarly, I believe, between markets, democracies, and liberal values, we have to find the corridor that works, where there isn't anything that's out of kilter, whether it's the CEO pay or let's talk about it. Like somebody described it to me, hey, CEOs is still labor. By the way, there's a bigger return. It's called the capital. So if you want to litigate where the returns are, let's litigate all of it.
When I wrote the Davos Manifesto 2020, of course I was confronted with this issue. And I walked this corridor by saying the executive remuneration should not be only tied to profit, but should be tied also to the ESG achievements. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. In fact, the way I have sort of interpreted it is take all of the initiatives we've done. I actually go make the case to our shareholders that it is in their long-term interest that we do what we're doing. So, for example, I'll give you even a very practical thing we did. A few years ago, we said we want to extend our parental leave and sick leave, not just to our employees, but even to the vendors who work. Because after all, they're working right in the same offices and having very disparate benefits makes no sense. So we said, okay, how do we do that? Of course, we have to pay for it. In other words, we will have to subsidize it. So that's profit out of our bottom line. And at the same time, no employee at Microsoft will feel good about working at Microsoft if they don't feel that we're doing the right thing. And our shareholders should care about our employees feeling good. Yeah. And so I think the CEOs do in today's world have more of work to do to communicate clearly that stakeholder capitalism is somehow not against shareholders. In fact, it is for the shareholders' long-term benefit.
8 फरवरी को इंडिया और पाकिस्तान का मुकाबला दिल्ली की सड़कों पे होने जा रहा है। दिल्ली में जगह-जगह मिनी पाकिस्तान क्रिएट कर दिए गए हैं। शाहीन बाग में जिस प्रकार से भीड़ ने सड़कों पे कब्जा कर दिया है, जिस प्रकार से लोगों को स्कूल नहीं जाने दिया जा रहा है, दफ्तर नहीं जाने दिया जा रहा है, अस्पताल नहीं जाने दिया जा रहा है, और फिर वो शाहीन बाग रिपीट किए जा रहे हैं। चांद बाग में कब्जा कर लिया गया है, इंद्रलोक में परसों रात से कब्जा कर लिया गया है, दिल्ली में जगह-जगह ये मिनी पाकिस्तान क्रिएट कर रहे हैं। इनको सपोर्ट करने के लिए मनीष सिसोदिया बयान दे रहे हैं कि मैं शाहीन बाग की भीड़ के साथ खड़ा हूं। जो लोग दंगा कर रहे थे, बसें जला रहे थे, पुलिस को मार रहे थे, उनको 5-5 लाख रुपए का इनाम दिया जा रहा है। तो मेरे को ये लगता है कि अगर कुछ राजनीतिक पार्टियां जिन्होंने 5 साल तक कोई काम नहीं किया, वो ये सोचती हैं कि दिल्ली में जगह-जगह पाकिस्तान खड़ा करेंगी और चुनाव लड़ेंगी, तो जब पाकिस्तान खड़ा करने की कोशिश हुई है, तब हिंदुस्तान खड़ा हुआ है। अगर आप 8 फरवरी के लिए शाहीन बाग में, इंद्रलोक में और चांद बाग में पाकिस्तान खड़ा कर रहे हो, तो ये याद रखना कि 8 फरवरी को दिल्ली की सड़कों में हिंदुस्तान भी खड़ा होगा और हिंदुस्तान और पाकिस्तान का मुकाबला देखा जाएगा।
You know, first of all, I would start by saying, look, every country does deeply care about their national security and their national interest, even broadly. That's why they care about their trade and having fair trade deals. They care about their national security, and I think that will always be the case. But that said, I think here's the way I would urge us to think about what should happen. If we sort of consciously quote-unquote decouple, whether it's the internet or the trading spheres or what have you, all we will do is increase the overall transactional costs of our economy, and everybody will be worse off. I think that's just going to be what will happen. I'll always go back. I immigrated to the United States in '88. Then I went and studied, and the Berlin Wall fell in '89. And then I went and joined the software industry in '90. And it was kind of like winning 3 lotteries in sequence. And the 30-year period has been just an amazing period of market access, the ability to expand into all corners of the world. And I do feel in the tech industry we need to grow up because the world is a little more complicated than that. And our responsibilities are more. But that said, I think any decoupling without some thought into how we can come up with mechanisms. For example, I believe trust in technology is something that the world will need more norms around. Right? Take cybersecurity. They've called for the Geneva Convention around cybersecurity. They've called for, and
we're very active.
Very active. Same thing on the AI ethics. I can take even the topic of AI ethics. I think China cares as deeply about AI ethics as the United States. To assume that somehow the Chinese people and the Chinese government are also not going to worry about the implications of AI run wild would be a problem. And so therefore, I think both the United States and China and the European Union having a set of principles that govern what this technology can mean in our societies and the world at large is probably more in need today than it was in the last 30 years.
Now, one of the key issues in the economy of today is how we handle data. And I think it was you who, at least you spoke out for data dignity. And of course, we have a tension. How much do we protect privacy? How much do we use the potential of those data for good? Now, you have expressed yourself on several occasions. Could you just repeat what is your opinion about this whole issue of privacy, which worries so many people? And how can we guarantee privacy and, on the other hand, still use the data, for example, for medical purposes and so on?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of things. One is, I would say, data and privacy around data at an individual level needs to be thought of as a human right. I mean, in some sense, Europe has taken a lead with GDPR and has even effectively regulated that. And in our case, we took that regulation. In fact, hopefully see a more of a federal standard in the United States and in the world over. In fact, we've taken some of the subject rights of GDPR and made it available worldwide. So yes, I think we believe that data and privacy around data is a human right. It has to be protected, it has to be transparent. Now, but here's the interesting thing. I think that this term I like, which we use called data dignity, goes one step further than privacy. Because data that you contribute to the world is got utility. Utility for you, utility for the business that may be giving you a service in return, and the world at large. How do we account for that surplus being created around it? And who is in control around giving those rights? That's the next level of, I think, work we all need to do, where it's not just, oh, I have privacy and I just give away my data. I should be able to, in fact, control in a much more fundamental way how my data is being used to create both utility for me and the world and the causes I care about.
Let's see, Mr. Pepper, would you agree with this statement? Yes, I think we should encourage, because not everybody shares your
I think everyone should care about their data.
Everybody should care. That's the reason.
If not, then that's a different world.
That's the reason why I wanted to get you encouraged by the reaction of the public. But could you go one step further and you could see something?
வெற்றி பெற்ற ஊராட்சி தலைவர் துணைத் தலைவர்களுக்கான வெற்றி பெற்ற அந்த தலைவருக்கு ஒரு நாள் பயிற்சி மாவட்ட நிர்வாகம் சார்பாக
wallet. So he can decide whether he
நம்முடைய புறநகர் கிழக்கு மாவட்ட செயலாளர்
Absolutely. I mean, I think that these are the kind of mechanisms we should be experimenting with. Which today, if you think about the exchange, what is ad-funded business model? And by the way, ad funding is not a bad business model because in some sense you're getting a free service. But that's the only data-driven business model purely where there is value exchange. And you could even say that the value exchange is not fair because the middleman in this case, the ad broker, makes all the profit. What if this thing was split a lot more even? The consumer benefited a lot more than just the free service. The advertiser whose prices, by the way, keep going up because it's second price auction, in fact, goes down. So I believe some of the best economics work should happen around data dignity and new business models in the 2020s will hopefully allow us to get there.
You mentioned already artificial intelligence. You have written a book,
ஏதோ ஒரு நிகழ்வை சுட்டிக்காட்டி அது அதோடு முடிந்து விட்டது. முடிந்து போன பிரச்சனையை இன்றைக்கு வந்து கிளப்புவது என்பது சரியா இல்லை. இன்றைக்கு கூட அவருடைய மகளுக்கு 2ஆம் திருமணம் நடத்தியிருக்கிறார். இதெல்லாம் எப்படி வந்தது? அவருடைய ரஜினி மகளுக்கு 2வது திருமணம். இதெல்லாம் அந்த காலத்தில் அவங்களுடைய மத அடிப்படையில் ஏற்றுக்கொள்வார்களா? இதையெல்லாம் மாற்றம் கொண்டு வர பெரிய அப்படிப்பட்ட ஒரு பெரிய மறைந்த ஒரு மதிக்கத்தக்க ஒரு தலைவர் வைக்கம் உங்களுக்கு தெரியும் வைக்கம் வைக்கம் கண்ட பெரியார் என்று சொல்லுவார்
couple of things. So first of all,
மகாத்மா
why
காந்தி
do
அவர்களுடைய
we think
அவர் சிந்தனைகளை
AI
நடைமுறைப்படுத்தி
does
உண்மையாக
mark
அதுக்காக
a
இறுதி
real
வரை
departure
பாடுபட்டவர்
from, let's say, the
அவரை
previous
பற்றி கொஞ்சமாக
generation of
பேசுவது
software and
சரியல்ல
software development? I think it's an
என்பதைத்தான் அண்ணா
important
திராவிட
topic because
முன்னேற்ற
for the
கழகத்துடைய
first time,
தலைவர்கள் நினைக்கிறது
we have the
ரஜினி
ability
மீது
for
எங்களுக்கு
software
விதமான
to be
எதுவும்
written,
கிடையாது
so to speak,
ரஜினி அவர்கள்
by
எழுதினையும்
data, as
நிதானமாக
opposed to
பேசக்கூடியவர் எதிலையும்
software
நிதானமாக
generated
கடைபிடிக்கக்கூடியவர்
data. So if you sort of think
தேவையற்ற
of
முறை 50
AI at
ஆண்டுகளுக்கு
a
முன்பாக நடந்த
foundational
ஒரு
level,
நிகழ்வை எடுத்து
that's the
இன்னைக்கு
paradigm
பேசுவதற்கான
shift.
That's
வாய்ப்பு
a
வந்தது
machine
என்ன
learning.
ஒரு
That's
தலைவர்
correct.
ஒரு
So in
நிகழ்வை
some
வச்சு
sense,
ஒரு
you know, you
மாபெரும்
essentially
தலைவருடைய
have data
போராட்டத்தை
generating your
அவருடைய
software, or the
பெருமையை
learning
சீர்குலைக்கின்ற
generating
வகையில் பேசுவது
being
தவறு
generated by
என்பதை
data.
தான் அண்ணா
But
திராவிட
at the
முன்னேற்ற
same
கழகம்
time, I
இங்கே
think we
எடுத்து
should
வைக்கிறது
not be
அது
too,
திராவிட முன்னேற்ற கழகத்தை
what
பொறுத்தவரை
should I say,
எப்பொழுதுமே நழுவி போகக்கூடிய கட்சி
fast
அது
in
திராவிட முன்னேற்ற கழகம் திராவிட
abdicating
முன்னேற்ற
our
கழகம் சொல்லாதீங்க அது
responsibility in
திமுக
what is
கருணாநிதி
happening.
குடும்ப
For
கட்சி
example,
அண்ணா
we have set
உருவாக்கின திராவிட
aside, you know,
இயக்கம்
we
அண்ணா
have
அவர்களே
defined a set of
கடைசி வரை என்ன
principles
சொன்னார்
around
நான் இருக்கும் வரை
fairness, around
தந்தை பெரியாருடைய
robustness, around
ஆசனத்தில்
privacy,
அமர மாட்டேன்
security, transparency,
தந்தை பெரியார் தான் என்னுடைய தலைவர் என்று
intelligibility
பேருங்க
of the
அண்ணாவால்
models that are
புகழப்பட்டவர்
created and accountability.
கருத்து மாறுபாடுகள் தந்தை
But it's not
பெரியாருடைய
just,
அனைத்து
these
கருத்துக்கும்
are
நாங்கள்
not just
ஏற்றுக்கொண்டோம்
words.
ஒன்றே குலம்
Although there's a
ஒருவனே
lot of
தேவன் என்று
principles
நாங்கள்
now that have been
நினைக்கக்கூடியவர் தான் அண்ணா
discussed
திராவிட
every day.
முன்னேற்ற
You need to
கழகம்
turn it
இன்னைக்கு
into
மத
software
வழிபாடை நாங்களும்
engineering
மத வழிபாடு
practice. So
தான்
for
பண்றோம்
example, if there is a
ஆனா
language
பத்தாம்
model that
வசதி
gets
தனமாக
created,
நடக்கக்கூடாது
you need to put in the
என்பதை தான்
hands
நாங்கள்
of
இன்னைக்கு
people
எங்க
who are
தலைவரும்
developing the
அம்மாவும்
language
சரி
model
புரட்சி தலைவரும்
tools
சரி
to debug
அதே
the
வழியை தான்
language
நாங்கள்
model, because after all the
கடைபிடிக்கிறோம்
model
அந்த
did
வழியிலே
learn
இன்னைக்கு
from the
தந்தை
corpus of
பெரியாரை
data.
சாடியது
So I
தவறு
think we as
என்பதை
tools
சுட்டிக்காட்டினார்
makers, software developer, platform creators, we are very focused on building the best tool chain so that anybody
ஏங்க
involved
துரைமுருகன்
in the
முதல்ல
process
நான்
of
கேட்கிறேன்
creating
துரைமுருகன்
AI
கேட்கறதுக்கு
can
என்ன
in
தகுதி
fact
இருக்கு
by
எங்களுக்கு அறிவுரை
design
சொல்ற அளவுக்கு
have the
துரைமுருகன் தகுதி ஏன்னா
ethical
முதல்ல அவர்
principle
வந்து
enforced.
அவருடைய
I would say
அரசியல்
that.
பாரம்பரியம் என்ன
One of the other things we have
வேற எங்க
learned
அண்ணாவோடு
is, you
இருந்தவர்
know, what's the best way
டாக்டர்
to
கலைஞரோடு
ensure
பின்னி
that there's no
பிணைந்திருந்தவர்
bias in
இன்னைக்கு திராவிட
AI?
முன்னேற்ற கழகத்தில்
Have a
அடுத்த
diverse
தலைவரா
team.
யார் வந்திருக்கணும்
So the
துரைமுருகன் தானே
best way
வந்திருக்கணும்
for us to
அந்த
in
அறிவுரையை
fact
முதல்ல அவருக்கு அவங்க
change the
அவருடைய
ethical
தலைவர் இன்னைக்கு
frontier
தலைவரை
of AI
ஏற்றுக்
is to
கொண்டிருக்காருல
have the diversity of the
ஸ்டாலினுக்கு
team
அவருக்கு
creating
சொல்ல
the
சொல்லுங்க
AI
அந்த
represent
தலைவர் பதவியை அது
the
விட்டு கொடுக்க
ethics we
தயாரா
want, so to speak.
இன்னைக்கு
And so therefore I
சட்டமன்றத்துல
think there are
அதிகமா
several
பேசக்கூடியவர் துரைமுருகன் தான்
mechanisms that we can
அந்த
create
சட்டமன்ற பதவி கூட
that are
வழங்க மாட்டேன்றார்
governors
நம்ம
in
ஸ்டாலின்
how AI
ஸ்டாலின்
gets
அவர் பையன் மாதிரி
created for
அவரே
good,
கொடுக்க
not
மாட்டேன்றார்
for the
எங்களை
unintended
பற்றி பேசுவதற்கு
consequence. I
துரைமுருகனுக்கு
just want
அருகதை
to
இல்லை
make one other point, because regulation does have a real place here. And especially regulation at the time of use. There are two types of regulations you can have. You can have regulation at the time of design and
தேர்தல்
the
ஆணையம்
regulation at time
தேர்தல்
of
ஆணையம்
use.
தேர்தலை
And so I
நடத்துகிறது
think
நீங்க
we should
இன்னும்
be
கூட
thinking a
ஊடகங்கள்
lot
தவறான
harder
தவறான
around
தகவலை
regulation at the time of
சித்தரிக்கிறீர்கள்
use, because facial
நடந்து
recognition
முடிந்த
or object
ஏற்கனவே நடந்த
recognition by
தெரியும் கூட்டுறவு
itself
தேர்தலாக
is
இருந்தாலும்
not
அது
good or
தேர்தல்
bad.
தான்
It
தேர்தல்
is
ஆணையம்
just
தான்
a
நடத்தியது
technology.
அதே
It's
மாதிரி
the
இன்னைக்கு
use
தேர்தல்
case that is
ஆணையம்
good or
அமைத்து
bad.
தான்
And so we have to be
இந்த
able to sort of
உள்ளாட்சி
even
தேர்தல்
think about
நடைபெறுகிறது
regulation,
தேர்தல் ஆணையத்தில் தான்
so
நீங்க
more at the
இதெல்லாம்
run time,
எப்ப
not at
தேர்தல்
the
என
design time.
அரசு துறை வந்து அவங்களுக்கு
But
உதவி பெறும் தேர்தல்
sometimes
ஆணையத்துக்கு
more difficult
பாதுகாப்பு
because the
வசதி மற்ற
consumer or the
அலுவலர்கள்
end
உதவி
user,
இதை தான் கொடுக்குமே ஒழிய அந்த
you
தேர்தல்
have
ஆணையம்
more
தான் தேர்தல்
split
நடத்துது எப்போ
approach.
தேர்தல்
You
என்பது தேர்தல்
always have
ஆணையத்தில் தான் நீங்க கேட்க வேண்டும்
strong opposition, which we have seen in other cases. Let me ask you, come to something else. I was very struck. You wrote an open letter recently, and I think to your employees, empowering. That was a sentence which struck, which caught my attention. Empowering everybody to achieve more in the common decade.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Because you could say to achieve more, this means to put more pressure on the people. What did you want to say?
Yeah, so we talk about our mission as empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I felt that at the start of a new decade, we needed to put more texture, more definition, more meaning to what achieve more looks like for us as a company, and obviously and what does it mean for the society and the planet. I would say there are a couple of different levels to it. The first thing, by the way, I care deeply about as a platform company, and in the fourth industrial revolution, where we now have the most malleable of resources, which is digital technology, to help fuel economic growth. Because for all the talk, right, the economic growth around the world is not actually that good. Because we have a problem that we don't have the economic growth we enjoyed perhaps in the third, at least in the beginning parts of the third industrial revolution. So we need to get back to real, I'll call it broad sectoral economic growth, right? So it needs to happen, and it has to happen in a very inclusive way. That means it can't just be in the west coast of the United States and the east coast of China. It can't be just in the tech sector. Tech sector is 5% of GDP. It may even become 10%. What happens to the other 90% of the GDP is what matters in terms of real economic growth. It needs to happen urban and rural. So I think there are many of these divergences which we now need to converge back, I would say, and that needs to be front and center priority. Now, by the way, that economic growth will only happen if two other things are also in place for achieving more. One is trust in technology. The one way we can, in fact, not only have economic growth, lack of economic growth, we can go backwards, is if we don't have trust in the very factor of production that's supposed to fuel the fourth industrial revolution. So whether it's cyber, whether it's privacy, we talked about AI, ethics, internet safety, these are all big topics where we will need global norms to ensure that there is trust in technology, and we, as the platform creators, will have to do our part. And lastly, I would say sustainability, which is achieving more means whatever economic growth we achieve is going to also make our planet more sustainable. So whether it's water, whether it's waste, whether it's carbon or biodiversity have to be front and center. And so that's the framework we have for achieving more.
I was just impressed by, surprised by the figure of 5% of the tech industry today. But if you look now at the transformation of the automobile industry is becoming a digital industry.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the future of industries, would you... For me, I feel the two revolutions which will take place using digitalization data are probably still in many industry sectors, but particularly also in the educational and agricultural field, where we are still very, let's say, backwards oriented.
Right, I mean, precision agriculture, precision medicine, whether it's digital manufacturing, I mean, everything is going to be defined by this fourth industrial revolution. But if you sort of say, what's behind the fourth industrial revolution? You've written the book, for which I wrote the foreword.
Exactly.
The fundamental thing that you're seeing is the increasing digitization of people, places, and things. Now, once you have this malleable resource, i.e. digital, you can start doing things you can't do with atoms, you can do with bits. In fact, you can make your atoms more efficient, where they are, how they move, how they're made, because you can simulate, you can predict, you can automate all in software. And I think that's the broad phenomena. Same thing with precision agriculture. The fact that you can pick the seeds, the time to put them, how to maximize or minimize the water usage, all can effectively be designed like how you would design a semiconductor. And so that ability to take even what is physical today and convert it into digital and then make the physical better is, I think, what's going to happen everywhere.
Satya, we are just digesting, let's say, the digital revolution, now artificial intelligence, but now we have quantum computing. And this may be even a game changer to your own company. Can you share some, you don't have to share your plans, but your general, let's say, appreciation of the importance of quantum computing for the future?
Here's a real good way to think about what's the motivation. You know, in spite of all of the abundance of computing we today have, there are many problems that today are not solvable by classical computers. Take, in fact, if you want a catalyst that is going to capture carbon, that's a computational problem that is not solvable by a classical computer. So in some sense, we need a quantum computer. But we need a real quantum computer, which is you need new physics, in terms of you need to discover new physical properties that exhibit quantum behavior that are stable. Then to be able to have a complete new software stack, right? Everything that anyone has learned in computer science to date is null and void. You have to relearn it. And that's kind of approach we're taking, which is we're building out, like always, a software stack. We even have a new language called Q#. You can go learn it today. You can program in it. And we're in fact simulating quantum algorithms on classical computers. In fact, Cleveland Clinic has done something very clever. In an MRI machine, one of the ways you can be much better, have a higher precision in discovering tumors, for example, is a search problem that can't be solved in classical computers. So they've used a quantum-inspired algorithm already to start refining it. So we're very excited about that next level of computation to fuel that economic growth we talked about.
It will take probably 10 years from now, but
there are many stops along the way.
Is there any question? We have time for one or two questions if you accept from the audience.
I'm happy to do it.
Let's take the first one from behind.
Thank you. Ash, Global Shaper from Toronto. My question is, what might be some arguments to perhaps help convince businesses that greater data dignity for individuals might be better for them?
I mean, you don't have to convince me, because in some sense, it comes down to new business models. For example, let me ask you this. How do you do price competition in a second price auction? So in some sense, you could say, hey, let me reprice who gets what for data. And so I think what needs to happen is real business model innovation around the ad-funded business model. Today, I think data, and I don't want to say that any one business model is problematic. The world needs all business models. That's the point, which is you can't have just one business model be the only business model. And that's, I think, what's not great for the world. So I do believe that there will be, by the way, the enterprise market, that's why where there is data dignity. No enterprise wants their data just to be, it should create surplus for themselves. Why is that not true in the consumer space? Today, the value exchange is a weak value exchange because you're giving away valuable data for what is considered a free service. But is the free service you're getting really all of the value you should be getting for your data? And that is what I think is the question that needs to be asked.
Let me take on this side any question. Any comment? Not the case. Let me take the last one.
Everyone, great to be here. I have a question on culture. As a former Microsoft employee myself, I left Microsoft in 2005 to focus on building the Youth for Technology Foundation, which is an international education technology nonprofit. I'm part of WEF as a result of Hilda Schwab and the Schwab community. But thank you for your efforts to really change things at Microsoft. And when you talk about empowering everyone to achieve more, my question is specifically, how are you doing that to do good and do well, especially with employee culture, to prevent what many like myself suffered from in the early 2000s at Microsoft, which is burnout?
It's a great, I'm glad you should come back now. To me, the lived experience of the people inside the company is everything. As a CEO, I always say that my biggest job is curation of culture, right? I mean, in some sense, we sometimes forget that in order to get your strategies right and products right, you need two things that really anchor you. That sense of purpose and mission, which gives you direction, right? And then culture, which makes it even possible for you to pursue that mission. And that's where I think the tone at the top, the focus on it, what are the ways we go about not just saying we have a culture X, we're going to change it to Y, and it's a one-time change, and then we'll forget about it. That's just not what it is. I mean, it's every day, all of the 140,000 people who work at Microsoft are going to come and look and say, is my lived experience close to what is the espoused culture? And that's the difficult framing of it. I would say whatever change we've been able to achieve is because the cultural meme we picked was inspired by Carol Dweck and her work around growth mindset, right? The concept is simple, which is if you go to school and you take two kids, one of them has more innate capability and the other has less, but one of them is the person with more innate capability is a know-it-all and the other is a learn-it-all, you know how the story ends. That applies to CEOs, that applies to companies, that applies to all the 140,000 people in the company. And so we have taken that and said, how do we confront, each of us, our fixed mindset each day when it comes to diversity and inclusion, when it comes to customer obsession, when it comes to even how we as a company come together. None of our customers can care less about sort of our divisional boundaries. So we need to come together. That's where you have to confront your fixed mindset. In fact, even today, sometimes people at Microsoft will come to me and say, Satya, we found the 15 people at Microsoft who don't have a growth mindset. That's not the point. The point is not to go look for the 15 people. It's to be able to, for me, to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm not perfect, I'll never be perfect, but I can learn. That's a good posture to have a living culture that is constantly keeping up with our own aspirations. Because I think we as human beings are never going to be satisfied with sort of what is the culture around us. Because our standards are going to keep going up. And so that's what we aspire to do. And we definitely are on a journey, and it's a continuous journey. And I think it's time for you to come back.
No, unfortunately, we come to the end of this fascinating discussion. But I think what I take with me, we are living in such a disruptive time. We don't have the answer to all these issues. And I mean, managing a company like Microsoft is such a complex challenge. But what I admire and what we have seen also in this session, you have to remain human, and you have, even if you are at the top, in the top position and you use the word, you have to confess that you are vulnerable. And as long as you know you are vulnerable, you work also to make sure that you remain human. Before I end and thank you, I just want to appreciate Microsoft's strong partnership with the forum. We spoke about the need to develop ethical frameworks around the new technologies, what we are doing now in our network of for the fourth industrial revolution, where Microsoft is very much engaged, and also to thank you, among many things, for the particular engagement for Uplink, which is a joint project with the UN, where we want to create a digital platform behind.
Two quick questions. One, we've seen the UK counter-terrorism sort of meeting happen here with the Indian delegations, and also the Indian High Commissioner meet with Preeti Patel. How concerned is India really about these planned SFJ protests on the Khalistan issue? Have you written to the High Commission here in New Delhi raising the issue? And B, Donald Trump once again raising the Kashmir issue, even as a proposed trip to India is being planned. I mean, I know India's official position on the issue, but what is the sense? Is he speaking out of some sort of a conviction? Is there a pattern to what is, the timing to it? How do you really assess, or why is he saying the same issue, bringing up the same topic again and again?
We got very satisfying answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very strongly with the UK foreign.